My name is Garrett. When I was a sophomore, I learned an expensive lesson. Never assume you're safe, even in your own home. After freshman year, I lost my dorm placement, desperate and almost homeless. I grabbed the only option left, a room in the co-op. It was a cluster of 3 old houses, technically near campus, but surprisingly distant in spirit. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap. And when you're a broke college student, cheap means survival. I told myself I had a bike, and a little exercise wouldn't kill me. The co-op was a strange mix of people. Most were students like me, but a few were graduates who refused to move on, a couple of TAs, and some older adults returning for degrees. But from the first day, there was one person who didn't belong, an older woman, maybe 60, though she looked even older. She lived in one of the other 2 houses. Her hair was a brittle gray mix, her walk uneven, as if an old injury still haunted her spine. She was an island of silence. She never spoke, and her face carried a terrifying emptiness. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was the absence of anything human. I guess she had some connection to the school, but no one ever said. And there was an unspoken rule that I quickly picked up. We don't ask about her. The first strange thing happened in our shared kitchen. Her presence there made no sense. She had her own kitchen. She didn't cook, didn't eat, didn't even pour herself a glass of water. That night, the kitchen was full of noise, people cooking dinner, loud music, laughter, and she was just there, standing in the corner, leaning against the wall, silently watching. Her eyes drifted across the room, not landing on anyone in particular, yet somehow taking in everything. I caught her gaze once, cold, empty, not a spark of recognition, but a chill ran up my spine, that irrational thought whispering that she was watching me. The worst part wasn't her. It was that no one else seemed to see her. They walked around her, talked past her, like she was air, a shadow that only I could perceive. They had gotten used to it, and that silent acceptance was somehow more horrifying than her presence itself. A few days later, I was in my room, my only safe space, trying to study. That creeping sense of unease returned, the instinct that someone is watching you. I looked up from my book, glanced out the window, and there she was, staring straight up at me. She wasn't on the sidewalk. She was standing in the middle of the street, in the freezing evening air, perfectly still, her head tilted back, eyes locked on my window. I didn't know how long she had been there. Minutes? Hours? I don't know why I did it. Maybe a stupid social reflex, an attempt to break the unbearable tension. I waved at her. The instant my hand went down, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. She didn't wave back. My polite smile froze on my face. Instead, something twitched across her empty expression, a spasm. Then she started jumping, up and down, right there in the street. Not a joyful jump, but a jerking, feverish, unnatural motion, filled with some sick excitement. She kept bouncing, eyes never leaving mine. Then suddenly, she turned and ran, limping, staggering, into the darkness beside the neighboring house. My stomach turned. I hadn't just acknowledged her. I had confirmed something for her. I had raised my hand and said, "Yes, I'm here, in this room." She now knew exactly where I slept. And that night, I realized I had just painted a target on my own back, and that night, after my stupid little wave, I couldn't sleep. My room, once my only refuge, now felt exposed. The next morning, I found one of my housemates, a guy named Mark, who seemed pretty grounded. I told him about the woman in the street. Mark didn't even look up from his cereal. "Oh, her," he muttered. "She's always around. Just ignore her. Everyone does." His tone was cold and final. I asked, "Is that a rule?" He finally looked at me, eyes dull and flat. It's advice. That advice sounded more like a warning. I had already broken it. I had seen her, and she had seen me. I couldn't accept that answer. The feeling of being watched was too real. I went to a senior student who had lived there the longest, hoping for some kind of wisdom. He was a bit more patient. "Listen," he said quietly, lowering his voice. "She's connected to the school somehow. Eccentric? Sure. But harmless. No record of violence." He tried to reassure me, but his words didn't work. I asked, "Then why doesn't anyone do anything?" He sighed. "That's up to the property manager. He decides who stays. We can't do anything." That's when I realized the harsh truth. I was completely alone in this. Everyone else had learned to coexist with the threat by pretending it didn't exist. I tried. God, I tried to ignore her, but she didn't let me. Little things started to happen. I began to hear her, even when I couldn't see her. That slow, uneven drag of a limp echoing down the hallway. Sometimes, at midnight, it would stop. Just stop. Right outside my door. I'd hold my breath, listening in the dark, until after a long and painful minute, the steps would start again. Sometimes I'd see her shadow drift past the bottom of my door, a silent shape in a sleeping house. My paranoia kept growing, and then it wasn't paranoia anymore. One night, around 2 a.m, I woke up thirsty. The house was silent as a grave. I turned the doorknob slowly, trying not to make a sound, and opened it. My heart stopped. She was there. Not just in the hallway, right in front of my door. So close, I nearly bumped into her face. She stood in the darkness, wearing only a thin nightgown, eyes wide open, staring into the space just over my shoulder. She didn't flinch, didn't scream, barely reacted at all. She was simply there. I froze, throat locked tight. After a silence that felt endless, she slowly turned and shuffled away, that dragging, limp whispering across the wooden floor. She moved as if I were the one who had interrupted her. I slammed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, gasping. What was she doing? Standing guard? Listening to me sleep? Or was she trying to turn the handle? Then came the final blow to my fragile sense of safety. My room key disappeared. I'm not the kind of person who loses things. I'm the kind who locks the door even when I shower. Losing that key wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. I tore my room apart like a madman, flipped the mattress, emptied my backpack, checked every pocket. Nothing. It was gone. The cold truth hit me. It wasn't lost. It was taken. I had a spare key, but that no longer mattered. The only physical barrier between her and me had been breached. She had entered my room while I was gone. She had gone through my things. And worst of all, she still had the key. She could come in anytime she wanted it. A few nights after discovering my key was gone, sleep stopped being a refuge. It became a forced surrender. Every night I drifted in and out, one ear always awake. And then, that night, I woke up with a jolt. The room was completely silent, but it was the wrong kind of silence. Too thick, too heavy. And then I heard it. A sound so small it was almost nothing, a soft rustling, a faint scrape. It came from inside the closet. I lay still, my blood freezing in my veins. The sound stopped, then started again, like someone shifting, trying to get comfortable in a cramped space. This wasn't a mouse. This was a person. Cold fear crawled up my spine, but then came a burst of anger. She had gotten in. Even after I changed the spare lock, she still got in. She was in my room, in my closet, right now. I wasn't the kind of person to lie in bed and wait to die. I wasn't going to give her that chance. I slipped out of bed, bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. I moved toward the closet slowly. The silence thickened again, a suffocating stillness. She knew I was there. She was waiting. I stood right in front of the door. I took a deep breath and yanked it open, shouting with everything I had. She was there, curled up between my clothes. But the sight was worse than I imagined. One of my ties, a blue one I often wore, was looped around her neck like some twisted piece of jewelry. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, staring at me in the dark. And her other hand clutched a kitchen knife that gleamed in the faint light. My scream shattered whatever state she had been in. She didn't look afraid. She looked excited. Before I could even step back, she lunged out of the closet, the knife flashing forward. I screamed again, but this time it wasn't a battle cry. It was pure terror. We struggled on the floor. She was weak, but she was feral. Like an animal cornered, she clawed, bit, and shrieked guttural nonsense. I focused on one thing, the hand holding the knife. I twisted with everything I had, and the blade clattered to the floor. I pinned her down, using my full weight to hold her there. "Help!" I shouted. "Somebody help me!" The door burst open. Lee and another housemate rushed in. Seeing me on top of an older woman, both of us screaming, Lee didn't hesitate. He jumped in to restrain her while the other called 911. The police arrived fast. The moment they turned on the lights, she went silent, completely silent. She stopped screaming, stopped struggling. She just lay there, staring blankly at the ceiling, utterly empty. They cuffed her and took her away, quiet as a ghost. Later, one of the officers came out of my room wearing gloves, holding something small and metallic in his hand. My room key. She had kept it all along. Weeks later, the truth came out. She wasn't a professor, not a former student. She was the property manager's sister. She suffered from severe mental illness, and instead of getting her proper care, he did something unimaginable. He hid her here. He locked her away in one of the empty rooms, treating her like a dirty secret, letting her rot among students who had no idea. The property manager was arrested immediately, and honestly, I blamed him more than I blamed her. I felt sorry for her, but pity doesn't erase the truth. She was in my closet, with a knife and a tie wrapped around her throat. She had tried to kill me. I could have died that night. I'm about to graduate, and I'll miss college, but I'll never look back on this place without remembering that night, the moment I opened the closet door, and the awful sound of something shifting in the dark. This story isn't entirely mine, but I witnessed the whole thing from beginning to end, so I'll tell it to you as truthfully as I can. Think of it as a warning, a quiet horror that unfolded just across the street, right there in the daylight. My husband Benjamin and I have lived in our modest 2-story house for over 20 years. All our children have grown up, moved out, built their own lives, and I couldn't be prouder. Our life was the definition of peaceful, uneventful, and safe. But what I'm about to share happened last year, and it tore that safety apart piece by piece, and someone had finally moved into the house across the street, which was a relief, because I had grown tired of staring at that empty, gloomy place for so long. Being retired, I spent plenty of time on our front porch, knitting, reading, or simply enjoying the weather with my husband. I called that little spot my neighborhood watchtower. More importantly, I listened to a lot of true crime podcasts, stories about stalkers, strange disappearances, unexplainable dangers. That habit had unintentionally trained me to stay alert, to notice when something didn't feel right. When the young man moved in, my curiosity woke up immediately. He was probably in his early 20s. driving a shiny BMW Series 5 that looked expensive enough to make a statement. Always well-dressed. Always wearing those branded shirts I had to Google to even recognize. People our age all shared the same thought. Either he was very rich, or he was working hard to look very rich. Despite his polished appearance, he turned out to be pleasant and polite. He introduced himself just a few days after moving in. His name was Quinn. Smart, energetic, easy to talk to. He got along surprisingly well with Benjamin. They laughed, talked basketball, and Benjamin even started retelling those old college stories I hadn't heard in years. Quinn said he worked freelance for online influencers, some kind of content manager or consultant. The details were vague, but it clearly paid well. He talked about stocks, crypto, investments, things that made my head spin. He didn't brag, but wealth just radiated off him through everything he touched. He brought energy to our quiet neighborhood, young, ambitious, full of light. I remember thinking, this is a good man, a successful one, and I'm glad he's here. Everything stayed perfectly normal for the first few months. Too normal, the kind of calm that only exists before a storm. Quinn and I often waved to each other from our porches. I'd see him packing for business trips, coming home late from work. But slowly, I started to notice little things, small inconsistencies, faint cracks in the perfect picture that, at the time, I tried to ignore. The crack I noticed was a girl. I can't remember exactly when it started, but I began to notice the same young woman showing up at Quinn's house over and over again. She drove a small white convertible, the flashy kind, and she was exactly the type of blonde beauty you'd expect a guy like Quinn to date. To be honest, she dressed a little too provocatively, but it wasn't her clothes that caught my attention. It was the way she moved. She always glanced around before getting out of her car, like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. And here's the part that made my stomach twist. She always came over when Quinn wasn't home. I knew his schedule well enough by then to recognize that pattern. It became routine. Once a week, sometimes twice, that white convertible would roll up. She'd unlock the front door with her own key, something I assumed only a close girlfriend would have, and let herself in. She'd stay for maybe half an hour, sometimes longer, then hurry back to her car. She never carried anything in or out. She never cleaned, never fixed anything. I tried to rationalize it. Young people date differently these days, I told myself. But my true crime instincts didn't buy it. Why sneak into your boyfriend's house when he isn't there? What was she doing inside? It kept happening, again and again, with clockwork precision, and it started to make my skin crawl. Then one evening, I finally saw them together. Quinn pulled into his driveway with her in the passenger seat. They looked like a perfectly normal couple, laughing about something. That confirmed it. She was his girlfriend. Her name was Ellie. But that confirmation didn't bring relief. If anything, things started to escalate right after that. One afternoon, I was tending my small garden when I heard screaming from across the street. It wasn't a typical argument. It was pure rage. Quinn and Ellie were standing in the driveway. She was waving her arms, pointing, practically spitting her words in his face. Even from across the street, I could see her expression, twisted with fury, almost feral. She looked like she was about to claw at him. Quinn just stood there, trying to keep his composure, but he looked utterly overwhelmed. Finally, she shouted one last thing, jumped into her car, and slammed the door so hard it echoed across the neighborhood before speeding off. Quinn didn't shake his head. He didn't yell back. He just stood there for a long time, looking drained, beaten, before quietly going back inside. I told myself it was just a bad fight. But then, I saw that white car again. When he wasn't home, again and again. The visits no longer felt like those of a girlfriend. They felt like invasions. I told Benjamin, I have a really bad feeling about that girl." He brushed it off, told me to stop being nosy. "You're watching too many of those crime shows," he said. But I couldn't shake it. My instincts, sharpened by countless hours of listening to true crime horror, were screaming at me. Something was very, very wrong with that blonde girl. And then that night came, the night everything shattered. Benjamin and I were torn from sleep by the unmistakable sound of an alarm. It wasn't a distant wail. It was screaming right outside our window, a piercing, relentless intrusion that sliced through the silence. We rushed outside and joined a few neighbors who had already gathered on their lawns, shivering in their pajamas. The scene before us was chaos. Blue and red lights flashed wildly from police cars and ambulances, painting the quiet neighborhood in violent color. Quinn's house looked like a broken hive, swarming with police. We stood there, breath held, as officers led the girl, Ellie, out of the house in handcuffs. She didn't resist. She didn't scream or cry. She simply walked forward, expression blank and hollow, eyes locked straight ahead. It was as if she had just finished a chore, not a crime. That emptiness, that total absence of emotion, chilled me to the bone. Then came the truly horrific part. They brought Quinn out. He was on a stretcher, covered in blood, his clothes shredded. My mouth fell open in shock. The vibrant young man who had brought so much life to our street now looked small and broken. We didn't see him for an entire week after that. I worried myself sick. When he finally returned home, Benjamin and I walked over to check on him. The confident, polished Quinn was gone. In his place was a trembling man with haunted eyes. He let us in and told us everything. Apparently, Ellie had confessed immediately. She was never supposed to have a key to his house. She had stolen the spare and made a copy. According to him, their relationship had started with her demands for luxury, expensive dinners, jewelry, lavish trips. When he hesitated, she became possessive and angry. And then came the part that froze my blood. Every time she showed up unannounced, he had no idea. She had been tracking his phone location. She had gone through his belongings. But worse, she had installed hidden cameras in his bedroom. Let that sink in. Each time she returned while he was gone, it was to replace the batteries and make sure the cameras still worked. He had no privacy. His home wasn't a refuge. It was a glass cage, and she was the only audience. The argument I heard that day had been his final attempt to break up with her. Ellie, of course, had watched the whole thing through her secret cameras. She saw him getting ready to leave her. The following night, she went to his house, not to talk, but carrying a kitchen knife. Somehow, Quinn managed to wrestle her to the ground, but not before she seriously injured him. The doctor said if the wound had been just a little deeper, he might not have survived. Benjamin and I tried to comfort him, but it was clear his spirit had been shattered. The last thing he said before we left was that he had learned a painful lesson, never to flaunt wealth, especially around people drawn to it like moths to flame. He moved away soon after. He said he no longer felt safe in that house, and this is the part that still haunts me. He said his ex-girlfriend had many friends just like her, and the thought that they might know where he lived made his skin crawl. We never saw him again. I pray to God he's all right. No one deserves to go through something so horrifying, especially someone so young, with his whole future ahead of him. You know, sometimes you don't just want a new beginning, you need one. For me, it was an escape. I won't dig into the past, but let's just say I was in a bad situation with my ex, the kind that made staying in my old city impossible. I was lucky enough to have a bit of money left over from my younger years, but I made terrible choices about the kind of women I surrounded myself with. That was a lesson I'll never forget. So, I packed up, drove hundreds of miles, and found this place, a picture-perfect neighborhood, low crime rate, quiet to the point of being unreal, mostly families. The houses here are designed for maximum privacy, each one spaced apart, surrounded by neatly trimmed lawns. That was what drew me in. But there was one exception. The house right next to mine was, for some reason, much closer, and it was huge. I don't mean big, I mean a miniature mansion, easily able to house 10 people. At first, I assumed that's exactly what it was, a multi-generational family, maybe even great-grandparents living together. I couldn't have been more wrong. Even though I wanted to keep to myself, I didn't want to seem rude. I decided to make the rounds and introduce myself. For some strange reason I can't explain, I saved the massive house next door for last. Everyone else I met was sweet, polite, and unsettlingly perfect. 90% of them were successful parents with expensive cars and endless talk about private schools. Me, a single guy pushing 30, felt completely out of place. I wasn't sure how I'd fit in, but that was my problem. By the time I got to the final house, my social battery was dead. I was tired of small talk. I knew if I went home, I'd never get the motivation to try again. So I swallowed hard, took a breath, and walked up the stone pathway. I was used to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when the door opened and a guy younger than me appeared, mullet haircut, fresh out of college energy, I froze for a second. He looked like he barely belonged in a neighborhood like this. I quickly recovered and launched into my new neighbor speech. Halfway through, he grinned, too wide, and actually cut me off. "Oh," he said with exaggerated excitement, "a fellow millennial. What a surprise." I laughed, relieved, and confessed how out of place I felt. He told me not to worry about it, that most people here kept to themselves anyway. He introduced himself as Damon and said I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged. "Perfect," I said. "How about now?" That's when everything shifted. I expected him to laugh and wave me in. Instead, Damon glanced over his shoulder into the dark interior of the house, like he was checking if someone was listening inside. When he looked back, the smile was still there, but his eyes weren't smiling anymore. "Wish I could," he said, "but I'm working." "Oh? What do you do?" I asked, just trying to keep the mood casual. The smile vanished completely. Gone. He stared at me for a second, long enough to make my skin crawl, then gave a hollow laugh. "Finance." That was it. No explanation. The sudden switch from friendly to cold threw me off. "Cool," I said, and to break the silence, I asked if he had roommates. "No," he said, "just me, alone, in that house." That was insane. We made a few minutes of meaningless small talk before he gave me his number, then backed into the house and shut the door. Still, I was kind of excited. Having someone my age nearby was a huge plus, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling he gave me. Sure, I lived alone too, but my house was a third the size of his. That was 6 months ago. I tried. I texted Damon a few days later to grab a beer. He always complained about being too busy, always apologizing for not being able to make it. Eventually, I gave up. I wasn't going to chase after someone who clearly wasn't interested. Then I started to notice things. I work from home, and my office is on the 3rd floor, with a perfect view of Damon's property. I know this sounds creepy, but his house is literally within sight of my computer screen. And what I saw was nothing. I never saw anyone come or go from Damon's house. No visitors, no parties, no girlfriends, not even a single pizza delivery. It was strange, because his car was always parked out front. I had no idea what he ate, because I never saw him leave. From my window, his house looked like a still photograph. Damon lived like a ghost, a hermit sealed inside his own shell. My curiosity turned into a slow, crawling unease. What does a young guy do all day in a massive, empty house, never leaving, never interacting with anyone? And then, after 6 months of that silence, I got my answer. That night was a Wednesday. I remember it vividly, because who throws a party in the middle of the week? I woke up around 2 in the morning. It wasn't a faint sound. It was an assault of noise. A pounding bass that shook the windows of my room. I always slept with the window cracked open, and the sound poured in like an uninvited guest. At first, I thought I was dreaming, a strange, vivid dream. But no, the music was real. I dragged myself out of bed, the sleepiness vanishing instantly, replaced by irritation and confusion. I peeked through the window, and there they were, 7 or 8 cars, mostly dark luxury sedans, packed tight along Damon's driveway. There was no mistaking it. My ghost neighbor was throwing a wild party. For a second, I almost felt relieved. So he was normal, after all. But that relief evaporated just as quickly. 2 in the morning, on a weeknight, in a neighborhood full of babies. This wasn't just rude. It was strange. I figured I'd go over, knock on the door, and ask him to turn it down. That's what a normal neighbor would do. I threw on my hoodie and stepped into the cold night. The closer I got, the heavier the bass grew, rattling the ground under my feet. But something wasn't right. Every light in the house was off. The place was swallowed in darkness, except for the dim wash of moonlight across the front. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked harder, using my fist this time. The music drowned everything out. I pulled out my phone to text him, then thought better of it. Stupid. I decided to knock again, as hard as I could. Still nothing. Only that relentless bass. Frustrated, I grabbed the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked. But to my shock, it turned. The door swung open with a soft creak. A gust of cold and stale air drifted out. The first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the entryway. At least 10 pairs, sneakers, loafers, even high heels. But something was wrong. The house was dead silent. Aside from the muffled music, I stepped inside, heart pounding. "Damon?" I called. No answer. The living room? Empty. The kitchen? Empty. No cups, no bottles, no sign of life. The house was pitch dark and freezing. Only that pulsing music played from somewhere deeper inside. I could make out faint party sounds mixed into it, laughter, chatter, the clink of glasses. But as I really listened, a chill crawled up my spine. It was a recording, not just music, a full party track, looping on repeat. I could recognize the same woman's laugh, the same clink of glasses, and then, 30 seconds later, it happened again. Exactly the same. The entire party was fake. Why? Why stage something like this? The cars outside, the pile of shoes, the fake audio. None of it made sense. But it meant someone was here. Someone hiding something. I should have left right then. Every instinct screamed at me to go. But I couldn't. I needed to know. I crept through the house, trying to pinpoint where the sound came from. And then I saw it. A door slightly ajar, leading to the basement. A weak light glowed from below. I don't know how I knew, but something inside told me the answer was down there. The stairs were dark, the air thick and damp. As I descended, the fake party noises faded, replaced by another sound, one I hadn't noticed before. It was mechanical, a heavy, grinding rhythm, like industrial machinery, or a wood chipper, or something worse. I held my breath and reached the bottom step. The basement was freezing. The light came from another room further in. I crept toward it. The grinding grew louder. When I reached the doorway, I looked through the narrow crack. 3 men stood inside. They weren't party guests. They were older, 50s, maybe, and dressed in heavy industrial gear. Safety goggles, thick rubber gloves dashed to the elbows. Work boots, which explained why their shoes weren't in the pile upstairs. They stood with their backs to me, focused on something in the far corner, out of sight, completely absorbed in their work. I wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far. Then, after a few seconds, another smell hit me, sharp, stinging. Bleach, not laundry bleach. Industrial strength chemicals so strong they burned my throat. The kind meant to dissolve things, and that's when it clicked. The fake party, the cars, the men, the grinding noise, the smell. Whatever they were doing down there, they didn't want anyone to know. And they were cleaning something up. A pit opened in my stomach, a primal terror telling me I was in danger. I couldn't explain it, but I knew. I turned to leave, moving as quietly as possible across the concrete floor. And then the light behind me went out. The door to the basement room, the one I'd been peeking through, was closed. I didn't hear it over the music, but I felt the air shift, the darkness swallow me whole. They knew I was there. I didn't think. I ran, up the stairs, 2 at a time, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Through the empty house, past the fake shoes, and out the front door, bursting into the cold, endless night. I didn't run straight home. That would be the first place they'd check. Instead, driven by adrenaline, I cut around the back, vaulted my own fence, and slipped into my yard. I ducked through the side door and locked it behind me. The soft click of the latch felt small, fragile, useless. My chest was on fire, my heartbeat pounding so violently it drowned out thought itself. Whatever happened, I couldn't let Damon or those things know I had been watching. I forced myself to calm down. I crept up to my office on the 3rd floor, my little lookout nest. I made sure every light was off, then crouched below the windowsill, peering out through the narrowest gap. At first, nothing. Just darkness and the heavy, fake quiet of night. Then, minutes later, Damon's front door burst open. Around 8 men, all older like the ones I'd seen in the basement, spilled outside. They weren't strolling. They were searching. Their eyes swept across the yard, the driveway, the street, methodical, cold, predatory. Damon wasn't among them. A few of them started arguing. I couldn't hear the words, but their gestures were sharp, furious. One shoved another hard. I didn't need sound to know what they were saying. You forgot to lock the door. Someone was inside. They searched for a few more minutes before heading back in. And then, suddenly, the party music stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It settled over everything, thick, suffocating, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I thought about calling the police. But what would I even say? My neighbor threw a fake party. There are men in hazmat gear, and it smells like bleach. By the time they got there, the sound would be gone, the evidence erased. They'd think I was insane. Or worse, they'd knock on Damon's door, and those men would know exactly who called. I was trapped. The next morning, when the first light hit my room, I looked outside. Everything was gone. All 7 or 8 cars, gone. Damon's car too. The driveway empty, the yard spotless, as if the night before had never happened, as if I had dreamed it all. I tried to work, but I couldn't. The image of those heavy boots, the grinding sound of machinery, the sting of bleach, they looped endlessly in my mind. Days passed. Damon still didn't return. Curiosity, or maybe desperation to prove I wasn't losing my mind, finally won over fear. I couldn't understand how no one else had heard the noise. I decided to ask. I went to Mrs. Miller across the street. "Did you hear anything Wednesday night?" I asked. "A big party at Damon's place?" She looked genuinely puzzled. "A party? Oh dear, no. It was quiet as always." "You must be mistaken." I tried the house next door. A young couple with a baby. Same reaction. It wasn't just we didn't hear anything. It was a synchronized denial, polite but impenetrable. It made me wonder if maybe I really had dreamed it. That was months ago. Damon still hasn't come back. His house now stands as a monument to his disappearance. The grass has grown knee-high. A pile of Amazon packages sits rotting on the porch. Cardboard turning soft in the rain. I don't know what to think. Maybe it was nothing. But no one stages something that elaborate. Fake parties, pre-recorded laughter, extra shoes. Unless it's hiding something truly illegal. And people that careful don't forget to lock a door. Unless they wanted it open. The truth is, none of my neighbors seem to care. And that makes me feel like I've stumbled into something massive. Or worse, that I'm starting to lose my mind. I still have too many unanswered questions. And I can't shake the feeling that if Damon ever does come back, I won't be the one asking him anything. He'll be the one coming to find me.